Hi everyone, thanks for joining in. I'm excited to have Julia Stone join me. Hi Julia.
Hi, Jackie. Thanks for having me.
Some of you might remember Julia was our author for the day a little while ago, so it's great to have you back.
Thank you. Yeah, no, and hi everyone who's here and anyone who's watching later.
So, just a bit about Julia. So, Julia lives in a tiny village of 150 people in East Anglia, England, and she's visited Australia only once, sadly, just for a few days on a business trip. But she has friends both in Melbourne and Sydney and would love to visit again. Hope you do get to visit sometime.
Yeah,
And
looking forward to it.
and Julia came to writing later in life, having had a 30-year career in business psychology and psychotherapy. After treatment for cancer, she decided to explore her creative side, taking a fine art degree as a mature student and then studying fiction writing at Faber Academy. Her first novel, Her Little Secret, was published by Orion Books when she was in her 60s, and her second book, The Accident, a year later. She writes psychological suspense novels with an emphasis on the psychology of her characters and often gives talks on this topic. Alongside her writing, she teaches ceramics in her home studio and at a centre for adults with disabilities, and she often takes part in art exhibitions. She still works part-time as a solutions-focused therapist and specialises in helping creative people address the psychological blocks that are holding them back from their goals. And I have to say, I recently just finished reading The Accident and really enjoyed reading it. So thank
Well, it
you.
has got an Australian character, or two Australian
Yeah,
characters.
yeah, it did do. So thanks again for joining me. Do you want to start off by telling us a bit about The Accident?
Yeah, sure. Here it is. It wasn't originally called that, by the way, but anyway, publishers and agents like to change titles. So it's about a woman who was, she's a genealogist, and she was driving on a main road when suddenly someone fell from a bridge and landed on her car. And it was a young woman who died in the accident. And the police didn't have any grounds for suspicion. It just seemed to be an accident. They called it misadventure. And as Janice becomes quite obsessed with the young woman, when the police return her possessions from the crashed car, and in amongst it is a charm bracelet. And she thinks it's a sign from fate that the dead woman wanted her to find her, because it's not her bracelet, it's not Janice's bracelet. And so she becomes quite obsessed with finding out more about the dead girl and the dead girl's family. And when she finds out that she's a backpacking Australian, she gets enmeshed in the girl's family and friends, with the girl's family and friends. Hence, on the cover it says, "Thrown together by fate, entwined by lies."
And what was the first idea you had for The Accident?
I was actually driving. I had an aunt who lived quite a long way away from me, and I used to go down to visit her. She was 102, and so she needed quite a bit of support. And I was driving back one day, and my mind was wandering, and I saw a couple on the bridge and above the road, and she had a balloon with her. And they were standing talking, and then they started kissing. I could see, as I got nearer.
Oh,
And
okay.
I was thinking, why would you stand on a bridge over a main road to have a kiss? And it just started my brain going, and I started thinking, well, hang on, what could happen? What could happen next? And hence the story flowed from that.
And we've got a few people watching, so just wanted to say to the people watching, if you've got a question for Julia, please type in comments and I can read it out. Sharon said, did you have much research to do for The Accident?
More small bits and pieces, because the character's a genealogist, and I've done a lot of family history and family history research, so I understand that side of it. Obviously, I've got friends who are Australian, and a family member lives out there, but I don't know a lot about Australian culture or language. So slang and so on. So I had to research some of that and ask people for help. So forgive me, please, if I've got some of that a bit wrong. But so it was just research around the edges. And the first book I wrote, which was Her Little Secret, is features a psychotherapist. So I am a psychotherapist. So there wasn't an awful lot of research I needed to do for that. But Google's so handy, isn't it? You suddenly have a question and you go, oh my God, type, and you've got the answer. So much easier than back in the day. Yeah.
I'm interested to know that you said you did research on Australian culture and slang. Where did you, did you have friends you asked, or?
Yeah, and then there's one of the books that I read not so long ago, my friend in Melbourne recommends books, and so does my friend in Sydney. And so I actually,
Trent Dalton,
I actually adore Trent Dalton. And so when I loved this book, but I found, oh my God, I don't know what they're referring to. And when they refer to a certain district, what's the relevance of that district? So, you know, I try to research some of those things as I'm reading, and some of the language, you know, we know, but, you know, from awful, I said, from films like Crocodile Dundee, which take things to extremes. And so I just, you know, I checked in with people and just said, you know, do people use this language? How common is it? And so on.
Is there anything that you found that really surprised you, or that you could share with us, or that you found a bit strange?
I'm just trying to recall. There was some of the stuff around the football. I think because obviously you play and out in Australia, football's played very differently.
Yeah, and it depends what state you're in to what you actually call football as well.
Yeah, and so my character was meant to be obsessed. One of the male characters meant to be obsessed by football. So, I had to kind of try and get that language right. I mean, again, it's so there's subtleties always, aren't there? So it's very easy to miss it when you're writing about a culture that isn't your own. So again, I do apologise if I didn't hit the mark.
And what did you find usually comes first when you're writing a book for you? Is it the characters, the plot, or the location?
I guess, well, first of all, it's the idea. So the idea for the first one, about the therapist, that was a book about, I just suddenly wondered what would happen if someone lied to their therapist. We assume that people in therapy are telling the truth, but what happened if someone set out to tell lies to their therapist? And that's where the idea from that book came from. Why would someone lie? And what would be the consequences of that? So I think I get an idea first of all, and then I start expanding from that idea, and that's where the character starts to come in, and the main characters and sub-characters from there. But I am a plotter. I do plot.
So do you know the ending when you start?
I do. However, it has to be said that the endings of both books changed substantially.
Oh, really?
So when both books, when they were written and submitted to the agent and to the publisher, had particular endings, which were the way I saw them. But when the agent typically wants changes made, and then the editor will also have their own opinion. So the endings, the second halves quite often do get substantially rewritten to change the sort of beats and the order things happen, and sometimes actually what does happen. So yeah, it can be quite substantial, and I think that's true of most fiction writers if it's a genre fiction.
And in your bio, we said you came to writing later in life. Had it been something though that you'd always had in the back of your mind?
Yeah, I mean, even when we were very young, I haven't got it handy to show you, but when we were very young, my parents used to encourage us to write little books ourselves, and she kept them all, and we used to write comics for each other. And we went on holiday, we'd write newspaper articles about the holiday. So yeah, I always enjoyed writing. I always loved reading. And then as a professional, I was commissioned to write several non-fiction works in my professional area. And it's so different. When I came to fiction writing, I couldn't believe the difference. When you write as a professional, very few people change anything you do. Obviously, if there's a grammatical mistake or a spelling mistake, it's edited, but nobody edits the structure of what you're trying to say. And I couldn't believe how much you're asked to change as a fiction writer.
And is there something that you find to be the most difficult part of your writing process?
Getting started, I love having the ideas. What I do when I get an idea, I create a notebook. That's all the different titles the Her Little Secret had. So I could create a notebook with images, and I have to find images of the characters because I don't know if you've heard of aphantasia. It's an inability to visualize.
Okay.
And I can't see in my mind's eye.
Oh, okay.
So I have to find pictures of the character, and then I describe the picture. And it's the same for everything about locations, things they own, everything.
That must be a bit difficult then with your writing process. Yeah,
if you're writing description. So my books tend to not have an awful lot of description, and I actually like books that don't have a lot of description because I can't imagine it anyway. So the hardest bit is getting started. I love finding all the ideas, putting it all together, but then when you're sat with that blank sheet and have to get going, it's the hardest part.
And when you're writing, do you have a favourite place to write?
I always write at my desk. Because I write direct to computer. I know some people like to go to coffee shops or whatever, but I have everything set up around me, a printer so I can print things out and review, etc. So it's just far easier to just sit at my desk and go. And I've got a lovely view out the windows. I would show you, but I'll muck up the camera if I do.
Yeah. No, sounds nice. And what about a favourite snack or drink when you're writing?
Loads and loads of tea. And then, I'm constantly drinking tea all day long. And then when it gets to gone 6 o'clock, or at least if it's gone 6 o'clock somewhere in the world, I might have a beer while I'm typing.
Nice. And what are you working on at the moment? Have you got anything you can share with us?
Yeah, my deal with Orion for these books it was a two book deal with an option on a third, and a small psychological suspense. So I'm working on the third book, which is about a psychologist who has an expertise in memory, and she's an expert witness in court cases on the witness testimony. And so I've started that one, and I've also got an idea for a book, and I'm trying to decide if it's fiction or non-fiction, which is based on a true event. My aunt sadly died a few years ago, and she left me 79 kilograms of costume jewellery.
Oh, wow.
And I can't bear to see it go to rubbish dumps, so I'm selling it for charity. And there's a lot of story around it, so I'm trying to decide whether to do it as a non-fiction or a fiction book.
And what about what you like reading yourself? Is there anything you might have read lately you'd like to recommend to us?
Yeah, I mean, I love books. I personally love, I read psychological suspense because it's my genre, and because it's something that I love trying to work out who done it. But in terms of other reading, I love books that take me to different times and different places. So I've recently read this one.
Okay.
The Island of Sea Women, which is set in South Korea, and it's from the 1930s onwards. Elif Shafak. Sorry, I'm not sure on the pronunciation. I apologise. Which is set in Turkey, and that one's set from 1990. That one, which is the Garden of of Evening Miss, and that one's set in 3 different time periods in Malaya. So I love books that are set in other countries, and give me an experience of a world that I haven't had myself.
Yeah, it's a great way to travel to other places and
Oh
times, isn't
gosh,
it?
yeah, and be surprised by things. Yeah.
Yeah. And when you finish a book, is there anything special you do to celebrate?
When I finish writing a book, there's always a sort of, oh my gosh, what happens now? How will that be received? Because it's such a, as you probably know yourself, it's such an exposing experience, or it feels it, with the first one or two you write. I'm sure when one's accomplished, one's more confident about it. But yeah, no, there's nothing I particularly do to celebrate, because and my partner's not much of a celebrator. I have to tell him we should be celebrating this. I think we went to a local cafe and had a glass of champagne with our fried egg.
Yeah.
But that was as far as it went.
Yeah. And how did you get into writing? Like, was it a struggle to get that first book published?
With the as I mentioned, with the non-fiction books, I was commissioned to write them, so they found me because of my experience in psychology.
Yeah.
But with these, this was the second book published, but it was the first one I wrote. So this one won, when I wrote it in 2018, it won the Blue Pencil First Novel Award, and I was then signed by an agent who fell in love with the story. But then when she took it out to publishers, unofficially, she sort of found that people didn't take to the lead character in the initial version of it. So she said, write another one. So it's during COVID, and that was when I wrote this one. So this was the first one published. And then I completely rewrote this. So it was still the young woman falling off the bridge and the obsession, but I changed the character's personality and the way events happened. And so that came out second, even though it was the first I wrote. So in that sense, it was trickier, because you're trying to meet the expectations of an agent, a publisher, the genre, etc., and it's a very different experience. So in some ways it was relatively easy because I won the competition, but in other ways, my very first novel, it was a full manuscript was requested by 3 agents, but that didn't gain any traction at all.
Okay.
So that's in the bottom drawer.
Yeah. And something that you'll maybe get out another time. And
yeah, maybe it's completely different. It's a romance, and
okay.
yeah.
And when I say to you that someone's a successful writer, what does that look like to you?
Oh, that's interesting. I think to me, a successful writer means someone who's a known name. So I think, obviously we all can define success in our own way, and I think that's absolutely fine. So I could define myself as successful because I've been published, and that's great. But others define it differently, and I think it's what you as a writer want to achieve. But speaking for myself, I know some other people who write psychological suspense, and their name is constantly out there. You see them a lot, and so that, I think, is one measure of success. But then equally, there are people who sell many, many books, and you don't know their names. You just buy the book, and enjoy the book, but you don't know who they are. So it flips both ways, I guess.
Yeah, and do you think maybe that definition, the view of that, changes as you progress along your writing stages?
I suspect, because at the moment, you're looking up, aren't you? To see. And so, I dare say it changes a lot.
And do you have any writers that inspire you?
Oh gosh, so many. When I read, it varies. Obviously it varies with the books I'm reading. But the other day, someone recommended it. This is a young adult book, The Girls I've Been.
Okay.
And someone recommended it to me, and it's so nicely written. It's very clever. It's got a kind of ticking bomb kind of feel to it. At the beginning of every chapter, she writes a short thing. So, for example, on chapter 2, it gives the time, and then it says 15 seconds we've been captive.
Oh.
And then the next, a bit later, it says, 12 minutes we've been captive. We have one lighter and no plan. And so there's a ticking time onto it. So there's something very clever about that I admire. And and then there are others I can admire because the writing's so clean and so gorgeous. I mean, this one by Maggie O'Farrell I read recently, and when I grew up, we were encouraged to write reviews in the front of books. I know some people find it awful to write on a book, but I grew up doing it. And you'd write your review, and then it would be passed around the family, and everyone would write their reviews.
Yeah.
So I gave that one 10 out of 10.
Oh, wow.
So I absolutely loved the way it's written, and I enjoyed the story as well. So I think, sometimes you just pick something up and you think, oh, I've got to read the next book by that writer, because it's so powerful.
Well, thanks so much for chatting with me. It's been great talking to you, and thanks for the people who asked some questions.
Thank you. And I hear you're going off on holiday tomorrow, so please enjoy yourself. I hope it's great fun.
Thanks. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thanks a lot. Bye.